Hi there, and welcome to another episode. So today's episode is slightly different. Well, not slightly, it's very different. I'm here in southern Spain, and I'm actually sitting in person with our guest. I'm here with Neil from Rewilding Bushcraft. Neil is a nature guide and a storyteller, and we've been actually introduced to Neil through another podcast guest, through Charlie. And every now and then, when a guest talks about things, I do pick up on bits and bobs beyond the visitor story. And I do remember Charlie talking about, the impact of coming here, working with Neil, and being here in the area and doing, we will learn what Neil is doing, how it impacted her journey. And I was like, well, that sounds pretty cool. And obviously, when I knew that I will be in my van in Spain, I made sure I messaged Charles like, hey, could you connect me with Neil? Do you think he'll be okay with me just, rocking up in his space? And so here we are. So hi, Neil, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. We've already had a couple hours chatting and I've seen the space around, but please tell us a bit more about who you are, what you do here in Spain.
Right. Well, first of all, we're really lucky to get this little window of decent weather because we've had 3 months rain in 2 weeks here, and it's been non-stop torrential gale force rain. And today is sunny, windy, but sunny. And otherwise, we would have to be huddling under an umbrella near the house in very un-Spanish conditions. So, um, well, the briefest backstory, I'm by training a wildlife biologist, and I spent most of my academic and professional career looking after and protecting rare wild animals and where they live. And it's something I've been kind of wanting to do, in fact, probably only wanting to do since being a little kid. And I fell in love with nature from the earliest age. I was always happiest in nature, and it was the only career that would probably accept me in a way, because I'm relatively unemployable. Some would say completely, but I'll stick with relatively. And so for many years I happily worked in a very privileged job, working with wonderful animals in wonderful places around Europe. But I began to realize over the years that there was something missing, an X factor that science on its own couldn't actually explain, couldn't actually describe, and that most of my conversations with people were adversarial. It was argumentative. It was fighting for a place or a species, and often trying to say no to things, no to inappropriate developments that would impact nature in a negative way. And I didn't want to do no all my life. I kind of preferred to do yes. And I also realized that I was talking with people whose minds were often already made up. Their careers were set. And they were politicians, and they were people in charge of large projects and companies. And so they were in midlife or later middle life, and were less open to the possibility of radical sort of hallelujah moments. And not impossible, because it does happen for all of us at all times in life, but just more difficult. And as I was in these wild places using scientific language with usually non-scientific people, often farmers, often people who actually I deeply sympathized with and got, because I love farming and farmers and the whole way of life, I realized that I wasn't bringing them on side. I was ending up with an uncomfortable compromise for both sides. And I thought there was a better way we could do it. And I thought back to that slightly awkward child at school, me, who couldn't sit still, who was rebellious, who didn't like to learn in a traditional way, and thought, how could I reach out to people like me to my younger self? What conversation can I have with that person? And really one of my road to Damascus moments, if you like, was realizing that almost all of the movement, the profession that I worked for, was about creating a sense of guilt in people. You haven't recycled, your car is wrong, your house is wrong, you buy too many things, you buy non-organic, you shop at supermarkets, and almost the whole conversation of the environmental movement is about guilting. And we know how that goes in the Catholic Church, for example. Nothing against the Catholic Church, but it's one that springs to mind. Or at school, or with your own children. Do you guilt children into being better people? But what I found as a young person at school, outside of the classroom, was that I really loved the natural world. And so how could I find a way to help people to love the natural world in a way that I did? That road to Damascus moment was realizing that actually it's much easier to protect something if you love it than if you feel guilty that you should protect it. And so that was my movement away from broad environmentalism into a deeper connection with the land. And I transitioned into teaching people the old ways of working with nature, the old ways of listening to nature, the old ways of moving in nature. And part of that conversation is how indigenous people throughout the world like to move and to think and to be. And I began to teach from that point of view. And that's how I ended up, through a long, circuitous, random, non-planned route, into this place in southern Spain, as you can say, at the end of a very, very bad, flooded, muddy, rocky road, with several horses, dogs, and a cat. So yeah, that's a brief potted history, if you like.
Yeah, and a beautiful land and lots of wilderness. I'm just marveling on the amount of plants, and we're now in spring, so everything's blooming. And even just now recording here, I can see little interesting spiders crawling all over my laptop. So the wildlife, it's around here. And obviously, you, Natalie, and our listeners might know that I do come from a rural, kind of a small village. So I grew up more in tune with nature. And during COVID, going back to the farm and kind of living back there for a couple of years really kicked my butt in a way to remind myself of why it's so meaningful and important to me to live more in tune with nature, to, do the things that not only help us, preserve the land, but really respect nature and understand ourselves. I think for me, the big part of connecting with nature is to understanding myself better. I'd love to know then, because you have this land, you have this opportunity to teach people, but how do you do that? Do people come here? How do you teach? Can you tell us a little bit more about the practicalities of then how you help people reconnect with nature, learn about all these wonderful things?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I kind of ended up here without really knowing how I ended up here, but I did. And I've never advertised for people to come, but they have, from New Zealand and Australia, from South Africa, from Brazil, the United States, all over Europe. They've somehow found their way here. And the most simple level is, I would say, you could say 50-50, that I teach my courses and then other teachers come to teach their courses in this place, and I become the host, and I become a person who can hold a space for them to teach. And the common thread that runs through the people who come is that they have a degree of integrity. They're not people who are playing a role or playing an ego role. They're people truly in service to that thing that they've been trained into. And so there are those courses that we might call, in the loosest sense of the word, shamanic, those that are derived from traditions that are either active or were active and are no longer as active as they were because of colonization, imperialization, and the occupation of those lands. For example, the United States with its indigenous population. And so I have groups that come from the United States, for example, and the Netherlands, with two guides who will lead people through something called a vision quest. And this is not an opportunity to play native. It's not an opportunity to co-opt other people's cultures. It is what we call, and what I would say is, an all-person ceremony, derived in part and honoring those traditions and passing the nod to those traditions and the respect to those traditions, but not overtly using the language, the clothing, the ceremonial aspects of those things, because the vision quest is something that's common to every indigenous population throughout the world. And it's basically a rite of passage. And vision quest is what we Europeans called it when we went to the United States, and some anthropologists 100 and something years ago called these sorts of ceremonies vision quests. But what they are is a rite of passage, i.e. a movement from one phase of life to the next, something that's terribly lacking in our modern Western type society, that we're born and increasingly are exposed at a very young age to very strong material, now particularly online material, and very strong pressures of consumerism and fitting into ideals of behavior, body type, thought patterns, a whole range of things from an extremely young age, with relatively little guidance from parents and grandparents who are equally lost in this time. And it's like, well, there you are, there's this complicated world, go and get on with it. Whereas those guides that would have taken a young girl from 9 years old through to 11 years old, and the physical, psychological, biological changes that took place within that young girl are gone. The role of the grandmother and the mother in guiding them through as a rite of passage. And so a vision quest as one aspect of rites of passage is something that a person is called to do. They feel there's something in their life that's upside down, that needs rearranging, that needs addressing, looking at, something that needs to be dropped or lost, or something that needs to be brought in. And they will connect with a guide. And that guide will bring them through various rituals and conversations to here, where they will then further engage in ritual and ultimately engage in an aspect of dying before they go on the vision quest. And the death is obviously symbolic, but it is the ability to die a good death. In other words, that you could die in that moment having all the undone things done, all the important conversations said, all the broken things fixed as much as possible. And people will even write their will out. They will write their will out and say, look, you know, and they will have conversations beforehand, and they will come here with a calling to take back some magic into their tribe, their community, in order to make that community stronger and more resilient and more loving and healing. And they will go through further ceremonies, which will culminate in something called a sweat lodge, or temescal in Central American culture. And that is more about rebirth after they've gone through the phase of death, and then they're reborn through a sweat lodge. And if there's any languaging I'm used, like sweat lodge, that you want me to say what's a sweat lodge, then please say what's a sweat lodge, Neil.
Yeah. So I think Natalie is great at asking questions like that when you finish. She's like, thank you so much for telling me that. What is that? So what is a sweat lodge?
Okay. Well, basically, it's a dome made of wood or bamboo, which has a pit in the middle and can fit usually about 10 to 20 people in, sitting on the ground. It's quite low sort of not much more than, if you couldn't stand in it usually, and that dome is covered with blankets, and in the pit in the middle, which is now empty, is ready to receive very hot stones that are heated in a fire outside. The stones have been cooking in effect for about 3 or 4 hours until they are actually cherry red glowing rocks that you can almost see into. And the person who is guiding the lodge, the sweat lodge, will engage people in a series of ceremonies in order for them to enter, very open-hearted, very full of prayer. This whole thing is about prayer. And I don't really like the word vision quest because it implies that you're going to get a vision. Usually it's more a quest of tears is what I prefer to call it, because tears are what is so common to this process. And you go into the lodge, and eventually the person leading the lodge will ask for some stones. And the stones are ancestor stones. They're where in that tradition, the grandfathers reside with their wisdom. And a number of stones are brought into the lodge, they're put into the pit, and the flap closes, and inside you're in total darkness. And there's some water in the lodge, which is thrown to the stones to create a sort of sauna effect. And usually there are herbs, and there is sweet grass, and there is sage. And in that dark womb-like space, and my dear friend Kadar Brown, who comes from the United States, calls himself a ceremonial midwife about giving birth, helping people to give birth to feelings and emotions. And the same with Bart and Rob, who come from the Netherlands. They have their own way of doing it. It's the same, slightly different language, slightly different traditions, same root. And those people will then guide a series of prayers through the lodge and a journey, a traveling. And eventually the flap will open and people can come out and then to go back in. More stones are brought in. This happens 4 times. And within that, there are prescriptions to the 4 directions, which are obviously north, south, east, and west, to various deities and spirits that are called on to offer guidance within the lodge. And as the lodge finishes, they will come out of the lodge, often very hot, very not dazed, but very almost in another place. And they will come out and they will receive something sweet. And that sweetness is a symbol of welcoming them to the sweetness of their new life. And then the next day, they go off onto the mountain behind where I live. And they will sit for 5 days and 4 nights without food. And they will just sit under a very simple cover, just like this cover above us here. And they will cry and they will pray and they will cry and pray and they will wail and they will ask and they will be lost and found. And they may or may not enter into other realms, the spirit realms, the animal realms. And on the last night, they will sit in a small stone circle from sunrise through to the next sunrise, some from sundown to the next sunrise. And they will sit and they will pray and they will cry for a vision. And sometimes the vision will come, and sometimes the vision has been there all along. It was that little ant that was annoying you for 5 days, when of course you're expecting a herd of wild buffalo to crest the sunrise, surmounted by warriors carrying great lances. But it was the ant. There was the message. And then you come down, you reintegrate back into the tribe, into the group, into the world of time. And you begin to embody the experience through story and sharing. And then eventually you carry those gifts home with you to friends, family, community, tribe. And it may be hours, months, years before those things can fully come out in a person. And that's one example of a series of ceremonies that can be done here. And I do something similar. I simply call mine the Deep Nature Quest. So Vision Quest, Quest of Tears. It's the similar route, a similar path through which others have walked down. Effectively, at the center lies the truth, to which several paths will walk towards it. So yeah, that's what a vision quest is, for example.
And there are two things that you mentioned that really kind of stuck in my mind, and they're the themes of death, but also you were talking about crying. And going back to, some of the conversations we had off camera, it's the negativity, it's the fear that we as a society have around these themes of like crying, especially for men, but overall crying is seen as something negative, as something to be avoided, something that we should not be doing. And the same, death is such a scary place, scary thing that, of course we don't want anyone, our loved ones, to die, but we live in a world where we are mortal, we're gonna die. And I think for me, it's interesting, maybe coming from Czech Republic, maybe myself individually, I've always had a very rational approach to death. Like, of course, I'm sad for losing people, I'm sad for losing pets, but I'm accepting and I'm understanding that, my uncles are in a certain age and it's gonna happen, and I'd rather see them not suffer. The same for myself. I'd rather be in a place of being like, if it happens, I know I've lived good enough life until now. And for me, it really was the concept of death when I went to India and started spending a bit more time in the Tibetan community, and they have the book of living and that the book of life of death, and really the both sides. I would love to chat a little bit more about your perspective, or what do you think that these things mean in there? Like why that, obviously in the rebirth, but the part of the dying and the part of the crime, why is it so important to our process to then find the sweetness, to find the new vision?
Yes. I mean, it's a brilliant question and an answer that could last years, actually, much to your horror on the other side of the screen. But no, it's a lot of course, is symbolic. And I mean, you touched on the male thing, for example, and the emotional capacity of the male, or at least to show emotion, it can be quite difficult. And I mean, one thing I have absolutely noticed, seeing young boys and girls here on adventure weekends and nature weekends, is that boys almost always are, age for age, far more emotionally immature than girls. So 9-year-olds and 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds and 10-year-olds, 16 and 16. And yet the society in which we live tells us the opposite. It says the female, the feminine, is very emotional and the male is very rational and strong. But it's not actually true, because in most native societies, it's the male that's the peacock. If you think of the male wearing feathers in Africa, Australia, South America, North America, males often wear makeup, lots of makeup, and lots of bright clothes. Yet here in the West, we've stuffed men into grey and brown, and say, man up, don't be a girl, don't show emotion. And so one of those things is that you go back to the rite of passage again. Where is the grandfather and the father saying to the boy, do you know what? It's all right. It's really okay to show your weakness, your vulnerability, your tears, and they're beautiful. And that makes you strong. Not the other stuff, not the macho stuff, not the Andrew Tates and Donald Trumps of this world. And not to be political about it, because it's not left or right, that comment, but it's the myth that in order to be male and strong and masculine, this is what we could attain, or the opposite, where masculinity is denied and you say you have to get in touch with your feminine side. Well, let's start with getting in touch with the masculine side and see what that vulnerable masculine child is actually all about, and how does it want to grow and flower. And once men are more comfortable with that emotionally and spiritually, then they can grow into and attach more clearly into the feminine and be more of that whole yin and yang thing, that whole balance. And the death part of it, of course, is, again, in the West, death is something that's not really talked about. Nowadays, almost every aspect of our life, every phase of our life, from childbirth to older age, is medicalized by a huge, massive, gigantic business culture. who wants to medicalize every aspect of our life. And death is somehow the end. Death is bad. Death is scary, which of course it is in a way. And it's the ultimate thing you can't escape. The ultimate joke, really, no matter how much wealth, how much knowledge, how much enlightenment you have, that's still waiting for you somewhere down the line. And it's how we approach that. And can we, in every moment, actually say we've died a good death?
Mm-hmm.
Have we done those things that we needed to have done and not put off? Have we been the best version of ourselves that we can, the gentlest, kindest? It's not to say we haven't made many mistakes. I've made many mistakes and will make mistakes, but it is using those things as power and tools and truth to help yourself grow. And if through ritual and a rite of passage, we can say, okay, I can now become a little bit more friendly with death, because what does it mean? We often find that it's the fear of fear, not the fear of death, that's the issue. And in almost every indigenous culture, death isn't something that's an endpoint, because every indigenous culture that I've been in and studied and listened to has everything that is living is a cycle. And everything is a part of something that's greater. And so our particular physical form is simply a small aspect of something much deeper and greater. And that thing doesn't die. And if we can realize that we are that and not this, then there isn't a death. But in order to do that, we have to break everything that we believe that we're not. And so it's a very destructive process. It's basically, it's almost like burning every spiritual book you own, every spiritual concept, every spiritual idea, every belief. And every time you think you've got it, you've got the answer, burn that too, until there are no answers and no questions. And it's the same with the rewilding part. It's not that we need to go out more into nature to discover our wild side. It's actually destroying every concept that we are not wild and free right now in this moment. And that living in the middle of London is no less or more being in nature than living in the middle of the Amazon, because we're both at that moment, those two souls are on planet Earth. One has a lot more concrete, one has a lot more trees, but we're breathing the same air, looking at the same sun, seeing the same stars. The air might be thicker in London and grayer, but it's still air, it's still life. We're still eating, drinking, sleeping, making more of ourselves. We're still actually just no more or less than monkeys that wear funny clothes and spend their lives moving things around, which is all humans do. We just spend our lives moving things around, and then we get paid for it to move more things around, and we buy more clothes, and we think that we're not those funny apes, that if someone could look at us from space completely dispassionately, they wouldn't see humans as being different from caterpillars. They'd see that our survival strategy was very different and novel and has had massive impacts on the earth around us. But there again, so have lots of other species over the wholeness of time. And what we never know, and that negativity you mentioned, this guilt that I referred to at the beginning, that we're guilted all the time, is we never know what the end point is. Had the asteroid not wiped out the dinosaurs, we wouldn't have had mammals in the way that we have mammals right now. Had not a certain species of cyanobacteria had an evolutionary breakthrough right at the beginning of life and produced a poison gas so toxic to all existing life on Earth that it wiped everything out, in a way that if it was humans doing it, we'd be so mad and have environmental movements to stop this evil bacteria producing this terrible toxic poisonous gas that just happens to be called oxygen. Because before that, oxygen wasn't important for life. It was toxic to life. Then it became important for that life, which led to the next phase and the next phase. And none of this is to say that it's all okay and we should all go out and buy a gigantic 6-wheel Toyota Land Cruiser and whatever it is. But if we can do it from the point of view as we're just a bunch of funny monkeys making a lot of mistakes that are not particularly well guided by each other at the moment, with a very novel survival strategy, we can approach our relationship to Earth in a more loving and gentle way, and approach ourselves in a more loving and gentle way, which I think is more productive than having someone wagging their finger and saying, well, all you need to do to save the Earth is buy a Tesla. And if you don't do, you're a really bad person. And it doesn't tend to work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that answers at all
Well,
the question, or
there's no right and wrong answer. We're looking for conversation, and we're
Yes.
looking for your perspective on, the topic that we have here, or whatever we randomly stumble across.
yes,
That's how we do the podcast. But one thing, when you were talking, my mind went to ego.
yes,
Because lots of the things where you were talking, I'm like, I'm okay with that. But I can feel lots of people be like, but ego, but we're human beings, we're better than. If we become, extinct, it's the end of the world. It's like, no, it's just like end of this version of this earth with this humankind. But lots of people are very much attached to their egos of, well, me and the way I am and what I have and what I do. That really then again impacts their fear of death and the fear of crying, because then the ego gets very hurt.
yes, it does. And we see a lot of that right now. There's so much polarization, so much, as the Dalai Lama said, so much knowledge, but so little wisdom. And we have access right now to the entire history of the earth through a telephone, if we want it. And whatever opinion we want to prove, we can. Because there are always two sides to every argument. And we see it daily, and we see the pain of people, and we see the fighting of people, and part of it is our Homo sapien territoriality, that thing which is in every animal. But a lot of it is, as you say, is an egoic response, which is a response of fear and ignorance. And there's in the world I honestly believe there are very, very, very few bad people. But if you believe the media, the world is full of bad people and not many good people. And many people who act out in a way that can be considered bad by one side or another side are simply people who haven't had guidance, who haven't had love, who haven't had opportunity, or who have had trauma, or who have had pain, or who are told what to do by those very, very few people who are actually bad, but bad being psychologically broken rather than bad in any moralistic sense. Like in Jane Goodall's studies, when she was looking at these incredibly close cousins of ours, there were acts of violence, as we would call it, acts of love, the whole rainbow. And very occasionally, and I can remember one of the subjects was actually bad, and you could see that in this chimp's face. There was something broken in it, and that involved itself, that individual, in aberrant behavior, in behavior that wasn't within the bounds of that society, in that species. And eventually that individual was pushed out by the others. But what was interesting, other chimps that were good chimps followed that one broken bad chimp until that bad chimp left, and then they reverted back to the original behavior. And we're no different to that at all. Way back when, in Sufi society and times, those people who were held in high esteem were poets and writers and artists and dancers and musicians and philosophers, and they were held in high esteem. And those people that dealt with money it was thought of as being a slightly grubby job, and they were held in sort of lower esteem. The way our society would value a cleaner maybe now, or a road sweeper, and the money people were like that. But it's now obviously flipped round, and the money people, who have to have a very strange point of view to be hyper successful and rich, are the ones that we're supposed to look up to, and the road sweepers are the ones that, well, they're just stupid road sweepers. But of course, when we had COVID, for example, we realized how important the road sweepers were and the people that stocked the supermarket shelves, because they were the ones that kept things ticking over, and they were actually became amongst the most important people again. So absolutely, this whole ego thing is very central. But I think ego, unlimited, unbridled, aggressive ego, is another function of a lack of rites of passage, a lack of guidance by those people, those elders who've done it all before, who've seen it over 1,000 cycles, over 10,000 generations. It's like, it's okay, little girl, little boy, to feel like you feel. And if you need extra help, then we're all here. Come and sit round the fire. Come into my lodge. Come into my roundhouse. We'll talk about it and share about it. And that villageness of Homo sapiens, where it works best, is in that village environment. That's where we're in our niche as a species. The village is Homo sapiens' niche, not the city. And I think that when we have that strong community around us, then we are better people. And I think the cities are the things that somehow need the guidance and the people in it. And actually, that's why they come here, mainly from the cities. It's not the country people who come here, it's the city people who come here to find that with various people who have that wisdom to pass on to them.
Wow. It's wow, where do I go? So first of all, it looks amazing where you guys are, and I am so jealous. I'm sitting in a, not quite a city, but in a house and concrete and everything. You guys are sitting, I can see the wind blowing through your roof canopy thing. And a few things that you said is this rite of passage. First of all, that was something that really resonated with me, because as you said, it's a tradition that we've lost, especially in the Western modern world. And I remember reading a lot of stories from Brazilian tribes and African tribes and Indian tribes and even Australians. You know, the Australians go walkabout, and they all have these different names, but it's basically also taking boys from almost boyhood into adulthood, you know, that journey that they go on with guidance, and every tribe does it differently, but at the end of the day, it's having that guidance from being a boy to becoming an adult, from being a girl to becoming a woman. You know, it's that journey that you take, and it almost helps you also to guide you on how you're going to move forward. You know, with girls, it's do you now become part of the medicine tribe, or the medicine woman, or the visionary, or you know what it is, and as the boys, do you become part of the fighting groups, or whatever it is, and you find that on your journey. And emotion plays quite a bit in that, and I mean, feel free to correct me if I've got my facts wrong, but they were allowed to feel who they were becoming, or who they were and who they were losing to become that new person. Like you said, that death and that rebirth. But we don't have that anymore. You know, you sort of, you become a teenager, and you almost disvalued because you're a teen. What do teens know? And then it's like, right, you've hit 18 or you've hit 20. That's it. You're an adult now. Deal with it. There's none of that process of who am I becoming. I've been this child. I've been a teenager, and most probably driven most people up the wall, myself included. And now all of a sudden you're an adult. Go and adult. And I think that's something that's so powerful, that we've lost all these traditions. And you just reminded me of all these stories that I've read, and just realized that there's something so powerful in that. And, you know, just embracing those emotions and embracing who I was to who I'm becoming. And I think we need to have a journey with that, whether it's with a sweat lodge, whether it's a walkabout, whatever it is, it's almost like you said, a rite of passage to becoming something new or something more than, or whatever it is that each individual has. And it's not about putting somebody in a box. It's about connecting with who they are. They're not trying to be Joe Blogs and, you know, have a bigger house, a better job, earn more money, and just be better than. It's about who are you becoming, who are you as the individual. And I love that. And I love that you've created a place where, as you said, city slickers can come and find their way. Because yes, it's not the country people or the farmers who are losing it. It's living in concrete, basically, where you have no connection with anything. You just get on we'll use London because you've brought it up before. You know, you get on these underground and you all crammed together, but there's no connection. You just crammed in this tin box going from A to B. Then you get out, then you crammed in an office for 8 hours, then you get out, then there's none of that connection. And I think it's something so powerful that you're creating. And another thing that came up, I don't know if Lenka might have mentioned it. I don't know why she would have, but we are in the process of moving back to South Africa. My husband's he's English, but he's coming with me. And one of the things that we really wanting to create is that space to be able to hold space for others, to just help them to find themselves, not necessarily with sweat lodges or anything, but just having that quiet, that nature around you. And African nature is very different to Spanish nature. Africa is wild. I mean, I'm sure you've been there. It's different, but creating that space that can maybe help somebody to find their way, to just not be inundated with the phone or the noise or anything, but just be out there and learn to reconnect with themselves. And when you were speaking, it was just helping me to yes, that's why I'm doing it. That's because I've been going through a little bit of oh my God, why am I doing this? And you have just reminded me. So thank you so much for that. It's always nice to be reminded of why are we doing something? Why am I packing everything up, shipping it? Well, not everything, but some of the stuff, shipping it to South Africa. Why am I going back to South Africa? Anybody who looks at the world of politics are asking why you're going back, but it's not to South Africa, it's to the land.
Yes.
That's what I'm going back for. I'm not going back to the cities or to South Africa as a political entity, but it's the land. You only get that land in South Africa, so you have to go there to the land. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for that. It's been really beautiful to listen to you and to be reminded of where we've come as a society, you know, with the Native Indians and the further back, and just what we've lost. And I think this is one of the things that we really love talking about on the podcast, is things that we've lost, but we are finding a way to recapture them. So it's having people like you who've created the space where, okay, I might have a job in London or in New York or wherever you are, but there's that place where I can go and I can find a way to find myself, so that I can bring that back to my tribe, to my community, and re-educate, I guess, help people to relearn, to reconnect with who we really are, I think deep down in our bones. We're not people who live in these concrete buildings. We are nomads. We are nature. We are energy. We are all these things, calcium and all sorts. And I think it's having the courage to find a new way of moving forward. And you mentioned that in the beginning when you had, you know, you've got people who are coming, and it's not about emulating or dressing up as them and being an Indian, but it's about taking that essence of it and doing something in a new way. Does that make sense?
It does.
And I think that is what it is. It's not about being like they were, but it's about, okay, what value is it that we can then bring into our own way of doing and moving forward with it. So
Exactly.
it just sounds amazing. And I'm like, I want to be where you guys are, sitting around a table and not sitting at my desk. But thank you for that. I just wanted to share what I've got from you know what you were saying, and you know, really talking about. But now I have a question. So the question is, you do also bushcraft, and I mean, you've spoken about the sweat lodges and the questing, but what do you do also on the bushcraft side, or if somebody's just coming for a weekend? Because not everybody wants to go through that
of
vision
course.
quest. I mean, that's quite intense, but just want to come for a weekend and learn to reconnect in baby steps. Not everybody wants to go do the whole big full-on hog right now.
Exactly. Yes. Well, that side of it for me, and there are many people who approach it from very different ways, and there's no right, wrong, there's no better, worse. I just do my way. And my way of bushcraft is another rite of passage. It is learning some things or relearning some things that at one point were passed on to us as an important rite of passage. One of those would be, for example, the ability to make fire at will. It's one of those things that made Homo sapiens Homo sapiens, and indeed the species before Homo sapiens. It was one of those incredible moments that allowed evolution to jump, for us to jump, the ability to make fire, and all of those things that can come from fire. But fire is also symbolic within it, because fire is the ability to create and destroy. Fire is the ability to reconnect with the ancestral line. And it may be 7 generations ago that your great-grandfather last lit fire in this way. But you can bridge that gap back to them. The same way to get down on the ground and very slowly read that ground as we would read an IKEA manual to build a shelving unit. And we're kind of all familiar with that. We're familiar with the whole symbology around an IKEA manual. But there's a manual for reading the ground. What walked on that ground? How long ago? What species? And the greatest trackers will look down at the tracks that are left, the spoor on the ground, and will not just read deer, but a female deer. And they could read a female deer with a small injury to its right front leg, a female deer with a small injury to its right front leg that was pregnant because its track was slightly deeper. And why did it stop there and turn at that point? What was coming in from the right or coming from the left? Why is the stride longer? And the ability to reread the landscape like that is another rite of passage. And all of this can also be fun, because we don't want to be too serious about life. If you actually, one of the things, if you look at most indigenous societies spend a lot of time engaged in fun, play, song, music, dance, story, sleep, rest, hunting, making, creating, crafting. Fun is this, and laughter is so wonderful within native people that it's an incredibly different quality of laugh. It's It's not laughing at a joke. It's laughing with life out of sheer joy. And within the whole bushcraft thing is that you're not learning to survive, because survival is merely the delaying of death. And it's a very militaristic viewpoint, a very Western, like, oh, but what if my plane crashed? What if? Whereas bushcraft, and there's a clue in the name, the craft is art. And bushcraft for me is an art form. It's about creating and living an artful life, a beautiful life full of richness and color and imagination and skills, and critically working together. Because all of these tasks, and I will often get people that come here, like 20 people, let's say men and women, boys and girls. And before you finish the introduction, there's 3 guys trying to light a fire by rubbing 2 squirrels together before they've even realized that that's not actually part of the task. And they haven't turned around and said, what do we need as a group? What do we need as a tribe? And you look at tribal society again, and the Bushmen of Southern Africa, something dear to your heart there. There will not be a leader as such. There will be leaders who are good at finding water. There will be leaders who are good at hunting. There will be leaders who are good at gathering. And when their skills are required, they will stand up and become the leader. But they know that because they communicate and they work as a team and they have fun together. And so those bushcraft weekends are about fun and learning. They are about connecting. They're about rites of passage. They're about ancestor connection as much as anything else. And I will never use the word survival or that. And yes, to touch on what you said, some very, very important points you made that about the city life. But the thing is that inescapably at the moment, the vast majority of Homo sapiens live in cities. And that's more so as you move towards the so-called Western countries. And can people in cities live in a way like I was describing, the village life? And the answer is yes, because the cult of the individual, which has reached its absolute, at the moment, its absolute pinnacle in social media with the selfie. The cult of the individual has risen to such extraordinary heights that in the past, a photo album you would have photographs, if it was a photograph simply in your house of your mum and dad, the kids, family holidays, the grandparents. If you could recreate that in a modern house out to social media, you'd have 40 photographs of yourself in every room and your breakfast in every room. But it's the cult of individualism has reached almost a religious level. But what if, through rites of passage in a city, for example, you could begin to recreate in a tower block, in what we would think of as a so-called non-natural environment, a strong community where there were places to grow shared vegetables, a place for a beehive, a place for shared books, shared tools, shared knowledge, where people would gather in the evenings around a fire somewhere in the street. It doesn't matter. Just because we're not allowed doesn't mean it couldn't be so. And to share the stories and to build strong, resilient communities again. And the only way we'll ever do that is to go back to these rites of passage, for people to tell us, it's okay not to be rich. It's actually better that rather than a couple working incredibly hard to pay for childcare in London, that you have an extended family where the grandparents, rather than being shuttled off to an old people's home before they need to go there, because there's nothing left in life anymore, why don't they look after the children and pass on their wisdom? Because actually, unless you're really, really infirm, old people have a tremendous amount to offer. And young children love to be with old people. But they're not allowed to see old people even nowadays, hardly, except in, again, the medicalization of society. They're in a home and you visit them and you sit there bored you know, rather than celebrating their wrinkles and their wisdom and their age and their infirmity and their nearness to death, where you can actually taste and touch the death of that person that you love, rather than them just, it's all being hidden away. And even though a bushcraft weekend wouldn't necessarily contain that, it would contain the family element if it was a family group. Quality time together, without phones, without outside interference, simple times of play, of laughter, of eating good, simple foods, where, and I know because I've had kids come back to me and say 10 years, 20 years later, oh, I never forgot that weekend that we did whatever. But they will have forgotten the time they were given the iPhone 29X large. They won't remember that moment. At the time, it's so important, but they won't remember where they were sitting, what they were wearing, what they were feeling. It's just another thing in the big pile of things that we sit on nowadays, getting ever higher on the big pile of things. But the experiences of life, like the person lighting a fire for the first time in 7 generations, doing it themselves. I've seen the wonder in the eyes. I've seen the wows. I've seen the tears. I've seen the anger where people can't do it and they keep going and they keep going and they really achieve something. Or they look down and that randomness on the ground suddenly becomes clear. And the message that the birds are singing becomes actually a conversation. And that you realize that you can talk to a stone on the ground, not, hi, how are you, stone, and then expecting an answer, but to pick up a stone and wonder, where does that come from? What's its story? Why is that stone round and that stone sharp? Why is it that stone from that mountain and this? How did it come here? What's its story in coming here? And that is a conversation with a simple object that we can do anywhere with anybody. And it's a rich conversation, which we used to have and we stopped having in a way. So the bushcraft weekend can be all of those things, but also, ultimately it's also got to be really fun, I think.
Fun is so important, and it's something that we've lost. You know, life is very serious. But talking on, I don't know if you've heard of it, but there is actually a place, a concrete block of flats. I can't remember where it is, but I think it's one of the really, really cold places, Alaska or Iceland, or even somewhere around there. I can't remember exactly where, but they are, I think there's about 40 flats and everybody knows everybody, and they have people in there who look after the kids while others go off to work. It is a real community. And a lot of times they have a shared dining room. So a lot of the flats don't have separate kitchens. They've got, like, you know, basics, but if you want proper meals, it's a proper dining room, it's proper big massive communal kitchens, and it's basically a community, and they all survive in this block of flats. And I think because you can't just drive to it, it seems to be that it's connected to a mine or something, so a few of the people do work in that vicinity, but it's so isolated that you don't have a choice but to really adapt. And if you don't adapt, it can be really difficult to survive. And I remember watching that and thinking, wow, you know, in the middle of this freezing cold climate, that's what I do remember. And this huge block of flats and people actually finding a way. And sometimes when somebody new comes in, they find it really difficult to sort of integrate with this community, because you have to be part of the community to survive. And, you know, they get groceries delivered once a week or twice a month or something, and you then it gets shared out. It's a really weird way of doing it, but it's when you spoke about in a city you can actually create a tribe, you can do it, and they do it because it's connected with a job or something, so it's almost been forced on them to do it, but they've adapted and created this tribe, and some of them have been there for years. And as you said, the young ones are brought up by the elders, because the parents are working or something, but it is doable, even in a massive concrete city, even in the middle of icebergs and everything else. You can do it. And I think it's finding the right tribe. If you're not doing it with family, but finding that right connection. And this is something I'm noticing more and more, is people are now looking for it more. Whereas I think a few years ago, it was about me, and just what can I do? But people are really now looking for that connection, rebuilding the right tribe. And I know in the business world, it's, find your tribe. This is very much a thing now. And I think with COVID and that total disconnect from everybody and everything, there's this urgency to reconnect, to build these communities, to build a tribe, to build a place where you can be part of something, whether it's in a city or in a town or rural, but it's reconnecting. Is this something that you've noticed, that it's people are looking for it more now than, say, 5, 6, 10 years ago?
I think so. I think COVID was a spur. It was a shock. We realized that we don't have the right to health or everlasting prosperity. And we stopped and we paused and we contemplated. And it was a tragic but wonderful punctuation in Western life. And within those times, for example, people were doing baking and community quizzes and supporting each other. And those community moments, like this building in the middle of this sort of glacier that you're talking about, where extreme environments force the community to be created again. An even bigger example is war. Just think how people and communities come together in war, and tribes reform. And I don't mean the tribe of country versus country. I mean on the ground, supporting each other, sharing, fixing, mending. Can I help you? Are you okay? And these more extreme events are pushing us to relook at what's important in life. And I think some people are beginning to realize that that it's not difficult to step out of it. It's not impossible to step out and off the treadmill. What's actually difficult, and we've been convinced it's not difficult, is to live our lives doing something we don't want to do with people who are not in our tribe, for rewards that we don't need, by spending too much of our times lying to pretend that we are enjoying what we're doing, and giving maybe 70% or 60% of our life to the pursuit of something that's unhealthy for ourselves, family, and the environment around us. Actually, to live that level of lie is incredibly difficult. To live more truthfully is actually, once you're in there, is easier. Those things that you lose are those aspects of ego, status, money, wealth, but are replaced by things that are immeasurably richer. And of course, the stumbling block to that, but I can't do that because I have a mortgage, I have children. But those things can be taken care of within community. Within these difficult times, actually, things do get done against the odds. Things actually do happen, and what it ultimately leads to are much richer, more fulfilled lives, where people are stepping out of their bubble in their city and looking for tribe, looking for connection, looking for community, looking for something that's just better and easier. And in the blink of an eye, that's our life, to have something that is not about ourselves, but it's about what can I offer to those around me. And we all know the joy of giving presents is at least equal to that of receiving. But life teaches us the opposite. for work. It's all about what we can get, but it's what can we actually give. And the more we can give more, we can give more agency by being more wholesome ourselves. It's I guess the analogy would be, the drill on the plane as you're taking off. Put the mask on yourself first when it falls down, not your child, because you can't help your child if you've got no oxygen. So you're going to be more fully available to your family, your community, your friends, your tribe, if you yourself have the oxygen, the richness of experience and life and giving, then you can give more to that. And you can become, in that moment, the leader for that. But have the ability to put down that leadership when it's no longer needed, and somebody else will step up who would have their skill and their experience and expertise, and to move away from this sort of globalized mishmash that everything's got to be the same and everybody's got to be the same, and to stop being so frightened of differences and perceived differences between us, and to celebrate diversity in its true way, not through law, not through oppression, but just to celebrate all those wonderful colors of the rainbow that make up our lives, I think.
So I think I've noticed this trend as well, maybe in my generation, my community, there seems to be a lot more people who seem to be pulled towards the co-living, the building. I know people in Cambridge, because it's a very unique area where it's quite hard to buy a property, have a property, like the standards of living, it's quite difficult. And I know people in Cambridge looking to build a commune like this. I think it's the Buddhist community in Cambridge for years now, been trying to put the money together, put resources together. They are, we say, watching YouTubers and influencers, and there seems to be a massive movement of them moving to places like Costa Rica, where they are creating these eco villages of communal. We're growing together, we're taking care of the land together, we're taking care of the kids together, we're making decisions together. So there seems definitely to be more of this now desire to be connected, to do things together. Part of it is the pressures of the world of, it's hard to sustain yourself. It's hard to make money, hard to take care of kids. As we said, like, we know that raising a kid takes a village, and yet we now have such a small families of mom, dad, and kids with no other support. And there's lots of younger generations now who want the support, who want the elders, or who want the aunties and uncles and all sorts of random strangers coming into the mix to bring up the family together. And one thought I also had when we go to the rites of passage is we're also more accepting, hopefully going there now, with not the traditional paths of life. Because for me, being raised, it's, you go to school, you have a job, you find a partner, you get married, you have kids, that's it. Where I'm hoping that we're getting more open and accepting to, not everyone wants to have kids or can have kids, not everyone wants to have this traditional path. Like, there's so many more aspects to life and options for us, how we can really find a fulfilled life, than is the traditional pathway.
Yes. Well, I think we're quite, again, we keep touching on this, we're quite hard on ourselves. And it's that we've got phones, the computer, and digital watches, so we should have the answer to everything. And we haven't. And I view us as a species a bit like a very awkward, clunky teenager at the moment, as a point in our history, that we've got incredible hormones and emotions running through our body, and we're left to deal with it as a whole species ourselves. And on the whole, we're not doing too badly, but occasionally we mess up. Sometimes we mess up really big time. And it's almost like you could view Homo sapiens as a digital watch in the 1970s. It was pretty useless, and it could do like one thing and not very well, but we thought it was the answer to everything, and that just by having it, we were just one step away from being an astronaut. And we've realized that we're not quite astronauts yet. Even Elon, we're not quite there yet. And so maybe if we were less hard on ourselves and realize that we're all just trying to figure this out, and we've had a like teenagers had a growth spurt, and our growth spurt is the Industrial Revolution, where suddenly we're thrown into a non-normal environment, working in a non-normal way, living in a non-normal type of structure with 1 billion people that we've never done before. And is it any surprise that it's really difficult? But what happens if we took the long view? You know, not 2 generations, but what would we be like in 100 generations or 1,000 generations when these things have come back into our life, when those aspects of ritual, the rites of passage, sharing community, people begin to realize that actually that's what's important. And we're going to shed the Rolls-Royce bit and the needing to have a country as big as the United States. And maybe this stuff will all pass. We're still evolving. Of course, we're evolving. And these big, painful growth spurts we go through that lead to war and famine and destruction as we see it, they're not things that we would wish to happen, but are happening. But what can we learn from them? How can we not have that again? And maybe we will make the same mistake, just like teenagers, like me as a teenager. It may have taken like 10 attempts to get that one basic thing that others got instantly, you see? And we're like that as a species. But the less hard we are on ourselves, the more easy it is for us to overcome these tribulations that we're going through and move towards something that is more beautiful and unknown. You know, like what happened after the comet hit the Earth and the dinosaurs left. It was something new that came in. Something new will come in now. I think that just this, keep going back to this thing, you know, how do you learn to love those things around you? And how do we share? And if we get those basics right, those foundations right, then everything else just begins to somehow work itself out. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think we could sit here for a little longer, even though the sun is hiding and the wind is picking up, but we could sit and talk. We can make a fire and talk around the fire, I think, for hours. But I think it's slowly time to, you know, say thank you and see if we can squeeze one more bit from you.
Hop on to our Patreon account to get this episode's amazing and wonderful gold nugget. People who've been listening to this episode or watching it on YouTube, where can people find you or connect with you? Do you have a website that people can look at, or they're just thinking, you know what, I want to find or go bushcrafting or just find out more about what it is that you do? Where can people find you?
Well, they can look at, and I guess you'll put links down somewhere, but I can give you those. But there's one for the Finca as a whole called fincadelahara.com. There's Rewilding Bushcraft. There's just an email and a phone number. And if you wanted to talk to people like Rob and Bart from Soulcraft, to do Vision Quest from the Netherlands, or Kedar Brown from the Rites of Passage Council, or Charlie Wall, who runs women's retreats, which is how I'm sitting next to this wonderful person here. You know, these resources could all be put down. And I think that it's not just about me, it's the community, again, of people who come here and the gifts that they bring, and all the people that come on their personal quests and bushcraft weekends, and the gifts that they bring to the land and to me too.
Yeah, we'll definitely get your info and we'll put all the details in the description so people can click it. If they feel inspired about any of the aspects, they will have a way to go. So thank you so much. This has been wonderful, but we always want a little extra again. And I have one final question, and you know, you touched on it. I feel I know your answer, but I'm always curious to know. Our podcast is all about finding more life in one's life. It's about ways of having happier, healthier, more fulfilled lives. So what gives you life right now?
Oh, just the most simple things gives me life. Just walking through this rich land, this ancient landscape, meeting the people who come here randomly, to have wonderful conversations, exchange experiences, every day I sit outside and have coffee next to a small stove, and every day the picture's a bit different. And in this tiny, small, humble corner of the earth, I can only feel huge thanks and gratitude for having me in it for some time. And that's what gives me so much pleasure right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you too, very much indeed.
Really appreciate the fact that we had this opportunity to do a slightly different podcast, sitting here outside in the wind, and really go deeper into what this earth, this land, this place, this time and space, your current, form of energy, what it really means to you, and why you feel you're here on the earth. So thank you so much for having me and having this conversation with us.
Thank you too, both of you, very much.
And for our listeners, what have you got from today? I mean, all I can say is, wow, I just want to get on a plane and go and sit in this tent with these two wonderful people. Of course, Lenka, and with Neil. But what have you got from today? Is community or bushcrafting something that's really given you that aha moment? Is building a community where you are something that you are looking into or wanting to create? Just being out in nature, or experiencing, or have you experienced a sweat lodge? Is this something you've done or would like to do? We would love to know your thoughts on this episode that we've shared with you today. It's been fantastic. It's been different, but different is always good and different is fun. We'd love to know your thoughts from today. And until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye. Here is your reminder about our Patreon, where you get all our really beautiful gold nuggets. And today we had a fantastic gold nugget to share. Subscribe to Patreon. The link is in the description below. Hop into the gold nugget section to access all our wonderful gold nuggets. There is also a free section where you can access snippets from past episodes, as well as some great content with tips, advice, and beautiful and wonderful wisdom. Come and join up and be part of the Into Your Life community. We would love to see you there.